Tara Montgomery wiped the counter for the 100th time, her gaze drifting over the quiet diner. The small, locally owned spot had always been a staple of the neighborhood, a place where the regulars gathered, sharing meals and stories like old friends. Tara had been working here for over 2 years, ever since she'd moved to this sleepy town, escaping the chaos of city life. The diner, with its creaky booths and mismatched chairs, had a charm she'd quickly come to love. She wasn't part of the high society crowd. She didn't need to be. The diner gave her a steady job, a modest but comfortable life, and a sense of belonging she hadn't known in years. The staff was tight-knit, a small but dependable group of people who had worked here for decades, and they all had their routines. Tara was the one who made sure the coffee was always hot and the pies were always fresh, and she did it with a quiet smile and a steady hand. She liked it this way, no drama, no surprises. But today something felt different. As she stood by the window, refilling the coffee pot, Tara noticed a dog sitting outside the diner's front door. It was an older golden retriever, its fur scruffy and matted, its eyes sad and tired. Tara furrowed her brow, wondering how long the dog had been there. It was strange to see a dog hanging around the diner, especially one that seemed so out of place. She quickly walked to the door and opened it, stepping outside to get a closer look. "Hey there, buddy," she said softly, bending down. The dog didn't flinch. It just stared up at her with weary eyes, its tail wagging weakly but with a sense of relief. Tara could tell the dog was lost, hungry, and possibly scared. "Where's your owner?" she muttered, not really expecting an answer. The dog let out a soft whine as Tara gently patted its head. She knew she couldn't just leave it out here. The town wasn't known for being kind to strays. She stood up, holding the door open, signaling for the dog to come inside. "Come on," she coaxed, "let's get you something to eat." As the dog ambled in, Tara gave it a quick look, noticing its collar. A bit worn and faded, but still intact. No tags. It was an unusual sight in a place where people treated their pets like family. Tara led the dog to a quiet corner, setting down a bowl of water and some leftover scraps from lunch. She just returned to her duties when the bell above the door rang, signaling someone's entrance. Tara glanced up, expecting a regular customer. But instead, a man stepped in, his face drawn with worry. He was tall, in his late 40s, with a scruffy beard and tired eyes. He scanned the diner, and his gaze immediately locked onto the dog in the corner. His face paled. "That's my dog," he muttered, rushing over. Tara turned to face him, surprised by the man's intensity. "He's yours?" she asked, noting the way his voice cracked as he crouched beside the dog. The man nodded quickly, his hands trembling as he gently stroked the dog's fur. "I've been looking for him everywhere. His name's Max. I didn't mean to leave him behind." Tara was about to ask what had happened, when the man looked up at her, his face filled with a mix of gratitude and fear. But little did they know, this encounter would change everything. Tara watched as the man gently petted Max, his eyes softening with relief. She stood a few feet away, hesitant, unsure of how to approach the situation. She had just seen the man come in, seemingly in a panic, and immediately head toward the dog. He looked like someone who was carrying a heavy burden, someone who had seen hardship and maybe even suffered from it. He was unshaven, wearing an old denim jacket and boots that had seen better days. "Are you sure you're all right?" Tara asked, her voice a little hesitant as she stepped closer. "He's been sitting outside for a while now. You must have been looking for him." The man looked up, startled by her voice, but quickly nodded, wiping his eyes. "Yeah, I thought I lost him for good. Been searching for hours." His voice was rough, but there was gratitude in his eyes as he continued. "Thank you for bringing him in. I didn't know where else to turn." Tara felt the weight of his words and the sincerity in his voice. She had assumed he was just another regular customer, a weary man passing through, but now, she saw something different. There was a depth to him, an unspoken burden that he carried. "Of course," Tara said softly, walking over to the table. She offered him a fresh coffee, her eyes lingering on the man's tired face. "You must be exhausted." He took the coffee with a small, tired smile. You have no idea. Tara had worked with all kinds of people. Regulars, tourists, and wanderers, but this man was different. He wasn't the typical type to show up at the diner. There was something raw and unpolished about him, not just in the way he looked but in the way he carried himself. She noticed how he avoided eye contact with others, as if too much attention on him made him uncomfortable. There was a humility in him, one that didn't ask for help but simply accepted it when offered. You know, Tara said, leaning on the counter as she watched him with curiosity, this is the last place I thought a dog like Max would be. Considering how quiet it is around here, the man gave a quiet laugh. Yeah, he's not exactly a city dog. I didn't mean to leave him behind, but I got distracted. He looked down at Max, who was now resting peacefully at his feet. I've been doing some work for a friend in town, fixing up his old house, trying to make a little extra money. I think I was so focused on the project that I didn't notice when Max slipped away. Tara nodded, sensing there was more to the story but not wanting to press him. You've been helping someone out? She asked, genuinely interested. The man hesitated before responding, as if weighing his words. Yeah, he said, his voice softer now. I try to help people when I can. There's a lot of people around here who don't have much, and I've got skills that come in handy. I know how to fix things, plumbing, carpentry, basic repairs. So when someone needs a hand, I'm usually there. Tara blinked, taken aback. She had assumed that, judging by his appearance and the weariness in his eyes, he was down on his luck, someone who needed help rather than offered it. But the way he spoke about helping others, his calm and humble demeanor, shifted her perspective. Here was a man who had been through hardship, yet still found it in himself to offer his skills to those who were struggling. It was a simple act, but one that spoke volumes about his character. I don't think I've seen you around here before, Tara said, wiping her hands on her apron. Are you new to town? He nodded slowly. I'm not really here long-term, just a few weeks helping a friend out with some work. I don't ask for much, don't expect anything in return. I just do what I can. I've been like this for a while, you know? Used to have a family. Used to have a lot of things. He glanced down at Max, his face softening. But now it's just me and him. Tara could see that there was more to his story, something painful behind the surface. But for the first time since she had met him, Tara saw the flicker of hope in his eyes. There was an underlying strength in the way he carried himself. He wasn't looking for sympathy or charity. He was just a man, doing what he could to survive and help others along the way. She reached under the counter and pulled out a plate of warm pie, one of their specials that day. Here, she said, setting it in front of him with a small smile. On the house. You've earned it. The man looked at her, surprised. You sure? Yeah. You've done your part. You're helping people, taking care of your dog. The least I can do is give you a slice of pie. For a moment, the man just looked at the pie, then back at her. His eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else. Something she couldn't quite place. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. That means more than you know. Tara watched him carefully as he took the first bite of the pie, savoring the sweet warmth. The simplicity of the gesture seemed to mean so much to him. A man who had lived without asking for much, yet still found ways to help others in his own quiet way. It struck her how much of the world was like this. People helping, giving, even when they had little to give themselves. And yet, the kindness was often overlooked, hidden behind assumptions. As the man ate in silence, Tara reflected on how wrong her initial judgment had been. She had thought he was just another tired, weary traveler passing through. But now she saw that he was someone far more profound. Someone who had found the quiet power in helping others, even in his own struggles. And it made her wonder just how many people in the world were out there, quietly making a difference without ever seeking recognition. Maybe the real heroes weren't the ones with the loudest voices, but the ones who simply showed up, did their part, and helped others in ways that would never be fully seen. Tara smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the grand gestures that mattered most. It was the small acts of kindness that truly made a difference. As the man ate the pie, Tara felt the weight of her own assumptions pressing down on her. She had looked at him and immediately pegged him as just another tired, down-on-his-luck soul, dragging through life. But as she watched him savor the pie, there was a quiet dignity in the way he ate, in the way his tired eyes closed in momentary relief. Tara couldn't help but wonder about his story, the one he wasn't sharing yet, the one he didn't need to. It wasn't her business, but there was something about him that felt different. Just as she was about to get back to her duties, the man stood up, setting his empty plate down carefully. "Thanks again, miss," he said, his voice still rough but full of sincerity. "That was exactly what I needed." Tara nodded, a small smile curling at the corner of her lips. "Glad you liked it. It's always nice to see a customer enjoy the food, especially after a long day." He smiled back, but there was something more there. A deep weariness, yet a quiet pride that she hadn't noticed before. It made her pause, wondering if there was something about him she hadn't quite seen yet. "I'll be on my way soon," he said, his voice a little quieter now. "But if you ever need someone for repairs, anything really, I'm your guy." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "I do carpentry, plumbing, small stuff. Nothing too big, but I can make do." Tara was about to wave him off politely when she noticed something that stopped her. A faint crease in his jacket, a deep tear along the sleeve. It was small, but the way it had been patched, with thread clearly showing where it had been hastily repaired, gave her a glimpse into his life. He was resourceful, practical, someone who fixed things out of necessity, not just skill. Someone who had learned to survive with little, but made the most of it. "Thanks for the offer," she said, feeling the need to ask. "But how do you manage everything with—" "Well, without much help." He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "You'd be surprised what you can do with a few tools and a bit of time. I wasn't always this way. Used to have a job in a big company, office work. But life changes, you know." He paused, his eyes shifting toward the diner window, staring out into the rain. "People change. And sometimes you just gotta figure things out on your own." Tara watched him closely. There was a quiet strength to him. One that wasn't about shouting to be heard, but one built from living through tough times, from adapting and helping others without expecting much in return. It was the kind of strength she hadn't expected from someone who looked as weathered as him. "You sound like someone who's had to deal with a lot," Tara said, her voice softer than before, a little more understanding. "Yeah," he said with a half smile. "I guess I've had my share. But that's life, right? You keep going even when you don't think you can. And you find ways to help however you can." He shifted again, the tear in his jacket tugging at her thoughts. "I fix things because I can. It's the least I can do when I've been lucky enough to have what I've got. Helping others is what keeps things going." Tara felt a flicker of admiration for him. She hadn't realized how much she had taken for granted. In her comfortable, predictable life, she had never truly had to fight for survival, never had to figure out how to make ends meet when everything seemed to be falling apart. But this man, who had been through God knows what, still managed to help others despite his struggles. It was something she hadn't fully understood before. "Where can I reach you?" Tara asked, her voice quieter, more genuine now. "You mentioned repairs, and I think I've got a few things around here that could use a hand." The man hesitated for just a moment before he nodded. He jotted his number on a napkin, handing it to her with a shy grin. "I'll be around. Just let me know when you need help with anything." Tara watched him walk out into the rain, disappearing into the mist. She hadn't expected to learn anything from him today. But as the bell above the door rang and the diner grew quiet once more, Tara felt a shift inside herself. A newfound appreciation for the quiet, selfless people who went unnoticed, who kept the world running in ways that weren't always flashy or loud. He had walked in with a worn jacket, with no fanfare or expectation. Yet, in the span of just a few minutes, he had changed the way she looked at things. He didn't boast about his skills, and he didn't ask for anything. He simply offered what he could. And that, she realized, was what truly made a difference. Sometimes it was the simplest acts, fixing a tear in a jacket, offering help when it was least expected, that left the biggest mark. The man's kindness wasn't in grand gestures. It was in the everyday actions that made the world a little more bearable. As Tara looked down at the napkin with his number written on it, she couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just the repairs she'd called him for. It was the reminder that even in the most unassuming places, there were quiet heroes who didn't need recognition. They just needed to be seen. And she was ready to see more of that. As the days passed, Tara couldn't stop thinking about the man who had walked into her diner that rainy afternoon. She hadn't asked for his name, and she hadn't wanted to know his full story, but she couldn't shake the quiet sense of discomfort that lingered after he left. He had offered his help so easily, without hesitation, and there was something about the simplicity of it that left her unsettled. She had spent most of her life fiercely independent, working hard for everything she had. Asking for help or even accepting it was something she'd always considered a weakness. Tara didn't want to admit it, but his offer had stirred something inside her. Something unfamiliar and uncomfortable. She had been proud of her self-sufficiency. For years, she had kept a steady routine at the diner, maintaining a semblance of control in a world that often felt out of her reach. But now, with that small exchange, something had shifted. It was a crack in the armor she had carefully built around herself, and for the first time in a long time, she found herself questioning if her solitary approach to life had been the right one. That evening, as she closed up the diner, Tara found herself staring at the number he had written on the napkin. Repairs. Nothing too big. Just let me know when you need help. It wasn't just about fixing things anymore. His offer had sparked something deeper within her. His simple, unassuming approach to life had made her wonder if there was more to being strong than doing it all on her own. But the truth was, Tara was scared. Her pride had always been her shield. She had worked tirelessly to prove that she could stand on her own 2 feet, that she didn't need anyone's help, that she could handle everything life threw her way. Asking for assistance felt like an admission of failure. Yet the kindness the man had shown her, his willingness to help without judgment or expectation, was a stark contrast to everything she had believed. As she got into her car that night, heading back to her small apartment, Tara couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that gnawed at her. She had been raised to value independence, to trust that she could always figure things out. But in that moment, she realized how much she had been holding on to, a sense of pride that had become a cage. She had spent so much time convincing herself that needing others was a weakness, that she had failed to see the strength in connecting with others. The next morning, Tara opened the diner to the usual quiet hum of early customers. But today something felt different. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the man. His quiet humility, his simple willingness to give. What was it about him that made her feel both uncomfortable and inspired? She hadn't allowed herself to let anyone in for so long that she had forgotten how it felt to trust. Her shift dragged on as she moved through the motions of serving coffee and clearing plates, but she couldn't ignore the sense of unease that had settled inside her. She kept replaying his words, his offer, and the calm, unshaken way he had spoken. She had been so wrapped up in her own pride that she had failed to see the beauty in his approach to life. He wasn't someone who needed validation or recognition. He simply gave because it was the right thing to do. But she wasn't sure she could do the same. What if accepting help from him, anyone, meant admitting that she couldn't handle things on her own? What if she let down her guard and it backfired? What if, by relying on someone else, she lost herself in the process? These questions swirled in her mind as she worked, each passing moment adding to the pressure inside her chest. At the end of the day, as the last customer left, Tara stood behind the counter, feeling the weight of her thoughts. She was ready to close up when the bell over the door rang, and she looked up to see the man walk in again, this time with a tool bag slung over his shoulder. "Thought you might need that hand you asked for," he said with a smile, his eyes warm and kind. Tara felt the familiar rush of panic in her chest. She hadn't expected him to show up so soon. She wasn't prepared for this, wasn't prepared to let him in, to allow herself to ask for help. But there was no turning back now. She had extended the invitation when she had accepted his offer, and now she had to face the consequences of her own hesitation. "I didn't actually think you'd come back," she admitted, her voice shaky. I wasn't sure if I really needed help." His gaze softened, and he set the tool bag down with an easy gesture. That's the thing, isn't it? We don't always know when we need help. But sometimes it takes someone else to remind us it's okay to accept it. Tara bit her lip, trying to push down the growing knot of guilt in her stomach. She had been so afraid of needing someone else that she had almost missed the chance to see the value in it. She had prided herself on her ability to do everything alone. But the truth was, she had been struggling in ways she didn't even realize. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, and Tara knew that this was the moment when everything could change. She could turn him away, keep doing everything on her own, or she could let go of her pride, face the discomfort, and allow someone else to be a part of her life. I don't know how to ask for help, she said quietly, her voice filled with vulnerability. You don't have to ask, he said simply. I'm just here to help. No strings attached. Tara looked at him, really looked at him, and realized how much he had already taught her without even knowing it. His quiet generosity had challenged everything she had believed about strength and independence. He wasn't the one who needed help. It was her. And she was starting to see that it wasn't weakness to rely on others. It was a kind of strength she had never known, strength in community, in connection, in allowing herself to be supported. For the first time in a long time, Tara took a deep breath and let her guard down. She realized that accepting help wasn't about giving up her independence. It was about embracing the shared humanity that connected them all. It was a lesson that had been right in front of her all along, waiting for her to see it. As Tara stood there, facing the man with the tool bag, she felt a strange warmth rising inside her. She had been so consumed by fear and pride for so long that she hadn't realized how much she had closed herself off from the world. She had lived her life like a fortress, keeping others at arm's length, convinced that if she didn't need anyone, she would never be vulnerable. But now, with the man in front of her, offering his help with no strings attached, Tara realized how much she had been missing. There was a kind of strength in vulnerability that she had never understood before. Okay, Tara said, her voice steady but softer than before. I could really use some help with a few things around here. It's nothing big, just some repairs and cleaning. But I've been putting it off. He smiled, nodding without hesitation. That's exactly what I'm here for. He set the tool bag down on the counter and opened it, pulling out various tools with the quiet confidence of someone who had done this 100 times. His movements were steady, methodical, and there was something so calming about the way he worked. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't for show. He simply did what needed to be done. Tara watched him for a few moments, taking in the ease with which he moved. She had assumed so much about him when he first walked in, the scruffy jacket, the tired eyes. But now, she was seeing him for what he truly was. A man who didn't ask for recognition, didn't need validation, but simply did what he could to make the world around him a little better. As he worked on the repairs in the back of the diner, Tara found herself leaning against the counter, her mind swirling with new thoughts. She had always prided herself on being independent, on doing everything herself. But she couldn't deny that, for the first time in a long time, she was starting to feel lighter. Not because someone else was doing the work, but because she was finally opening up to the idea that she didn't have to do everything alone. That it was okay to accept help. That it was okay to share the burden, to lean on others when needed. By the time he finished fixing the leaky pipe in the back and tightening the door handle that had been loose for months, Tara felt like she was seeing the world in a new light. Her mind had been clouded with self-doubt and fear of failure for so long that she hadn't realized how much she had been holding herself back. Every task, every decision had felt like a mountain she had to climb alone. But here, in the quiet rhythm of the diner, she was beginning to understand that sharing the load didn't make her weaker. It made her stronger. When he was done, he wiped his hands on a rag and turned to her with a grin. All set, he said. No more leaks, no more squeaky doors. You're good to go. Tara felt a rush of gratitude, but there was something else there too. A deep, almost indescribable sense of connection. She wasn't just grateful for the repairs. She was grateful for the kindness he had shown, for the way he had allowed her to see the value in opening up, in letting someone help without shame. I don't know how to thank you, she said, her voice quiet but sincere. You've done more than fix a door and a pipe. You've helped me see things differently. The man chuckled, shaking his head. You don't have to thank me. I just did what I could. But I'm glad you're feeling better about it. Tara smiled, the knot in her chest loosening. I think I am. I've spent so much time trying to be strong on my own, thinking that was the only way to do things. But now I see that it's okay to ask for help, to give help, to let others in. He nodded, his expression warm. That's the thing. We all need help sometimes. Doesn't make us weak. It makes us human. Tara felt the weight of his words sink in. It makes us human. It was a simple truth, but one that had eluded her for so long. She had been so afraid of showing weakness, of relying on others, that she had closed herself off from the very connections that could make life richer, more meaningful. Later that evening, after closing the diner for the night, Tara sat in the quiet, reflecting on everything she had learned. She had always thought she had to handle everything herself, but now she knew that true strength came from embracing the support of others. She wasn't alone in the world, and for the first time in a long time, she realized that she didn't need to be. The next morning, she decided to take a small step, a step that had felt impossible just a few days before. She went to the tool bag the man had left behind and grabbed a card with his name written on it. She called the number, her hands shaking slightly as she dialed. When he answered, she said, "Hey, it's Tara from the diner. I was wondering if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask me. I'd like to return the favor. You don't have to do everything alone, either." There was a pause on the other end, and then he responded with a simple, "Thank you. I'll keep that in mind." As she hung up the phone, Tara felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. She had taken the first step, not just in accepting help but in offering it in return. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. She realized that life wasn't about being perfect or invincible. It was about the connections we make, the ways we help and are helped. It was about sharing the load, and in doing so, finding strength in each other. As the days passed, Tara found herself approaching life with a newfound openness. The walls she had built around herself began to crumble, and she started to connect with her customers, her co-workers, and even strangers in ways she hadn't before. She had learned that kindness wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the strength of humanity. And so, in the quiet diner, Tara began to build something new. Not just the business, but relationships, trust, and a sense of community. A community that was stronger together than apart. Because in the end, it wasn't the repairs to the pipes or the doors that mattered most. It was the way she had learned to repair her own heart. As Tara sat at the counter of the diner, the morning sun filtering through the windows, she reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The quiet, simple life she had built for herself had been turned upside down by the humbling act of kindness from a stranger. She had spent so long believing that strength meant independence, that asking for help made you weak. But now, as she sipped her coffee, a warm sense of gratitude filled her heart. She realized that true strength wasn't about doing everything on your own. It was about letting others in, about giving and receiving help without shame, and about embracing the shared humanity that connected them all. The man who had walked into the diner that rainy day had unknowingly broken down the walls Tara had spent so many years building. His simple offer to help, no questions asked, had shown her a side of herself she hadn't even known was missing. The ability to trust, to lean on others, and to accept vulnerability. And in return, Tara had opened herself up in ways she never thought possible. She had learned that it wasn't weakness to ask for help. It was an act of courage and humanity. As she watched the first customers of the day trickle in, Tara smiled to herself. She had been so focused on her own struggles that she hadn't realized how much she had to give. The connection she had formed with others, the bonds of trust and kindness, had become more meaningful than anything she had ever done alone. Later that day, as she served a cup of coffee to a familiar face, one of the regulars, she looked him in the eye and smiled. "You know," she said, "sometimes it's the little things that make all the difference. It's the way we help each other out, even when we think we're fine on our own." The regular chuckled, raising his cup in a toast. "I'll drink to that." Tara's heart swelled with contentment. She had learned the most important lesson of all, that human connection was the true source of strength, and that no matter how independent you thought you were, it was the bonds we form with others that make us whole. And with that, Tara knew she was no longer walking this journey alone. She had found a new way of living, one where kindness, humility, and shared experiences guided her every step.